I think, 19 additional issues that he was going to put on the call for that special session to address, but none of them seemed particularly pertinent to the two-year sector. In terms of the budget, there were several outcomes that are noteworthy. TEOG received a slight increase for the community college sector. It was a $2 million increase over the 16-17 funding level. The funding for the state and technical colleges and TEOG was kept level. The Coordinating Board's developmental education program actually it looks like an increase there, but what that actually reflects is that previously we had diverted the legislature had diverted $2.4 million of that to the University of Texas Dana Center for new mathways. They reduced the amount of the diversion, so now only $400,000 will be diverted from our Dev Ed program to UT. The Accelerate Texas Community College grants, funding for those was eliminated in the budget. The Coordinating Board did receive a couple of new spending items. We received $376,000 and one FTE for Fields of Study. So this will let us accelerate our Fields of Study work with the goal of having the top 25 transfer majors, having Fields of Study in those majors completed by the end of the biennium. And then we received $140,000 to conduct a dual credit study. TEA also received that same amount, and the writer directs us to conduct that study in collaboration with TEA.
John?
Yes.
Can you tell me, what was the Accelerated Texas?
I believe Accelerate Texas, it's a ABE program, Rex?
Yes, it's a program run out of the Career College Readiness and Success Division, apologize. And it was designed for ABE students and primarily to link them to not only getting a GED or the equivalent, but also putting them into coursework leading to a Level 1 certificate.
And that was eliminated for?
That's correct. It had been funded at $4 million this current biennium, but next biennium it will not be funded.
Okay.
Is that because it didn't work?
You know, I don't know the specific thinking of the legislature. I will tell you the communication we had during the conference committee was that they had to make some tough decisions about where to cut. That there were to kind of meet the differences between where the House was and the Senate was, they had to look at programs that they didn't particularly want to cut, but I was told that kind of their focus was to try to insulate students as much as possible, which is why they primarily tried to protect financial aid programs, but we also saw additional cuts, for instance, to our administration. We saw an unexpected cut to the family practice residency program, and I think Accelerate Texas was one of those victims.
Let me just add real quickly that Accelerate Texas will not totally go away. We just will not be involved in the way we were and with money, but Texas Workforce Commission continues to get money from the federal government. It's my understanding they'll continue their piece of the work on Accelerate Texas going forward.
I'd just like to make one comment. Accelerate Texas has been a very positive program and has helped lots of students that are the hardest to serve get Level 1 certificates with very meaningful wages in a short amount of time. So it is a loss to the state of Texas.
May I just add to John's comments? On the Senate side is where we saw Accelerate Texas go away the first time that we saw the committee substitute, and the rationale was they wanted to increase TEOG at the community colleges, and so they needed to take the money from somewhere. And so that's where the $2 million actually came from for the TEOG increase. And then they, the way that the Senate approached it was they really wanted to protect any cuts to programs that impact students directly. So that was sort of their rule of thumb that they were trying to abide by. We certainly made the case to both the Senate and the House budget leaders that Accelerate Texas is a effective program that is needed, and unfortunately, this was the result.
Thank you. I'm sorry, go ahead.
Oh, and please ask questions as I'm going along. So as has been discussed, formula funding for public community colleges included an $18 million GR increase to core operations and a $10.8 million GR increase to Success Point funding. However, because the number of success points increased, what you're actually seeing is a very slight per point decrease in terms of how success points were funded by the legislature. If you look at the contact hour rate, you did see a very slight increase, a 1 penny increase from 2.69 last biennium to 2.7 for the coming biennium. So some of the policy outcomes of the legislative session, the legislature did adopt legislation to authorize the coordinating board to review and approve baccalaureate programs at public junior colleges, specifically in applied science, applied technology, and nursing. It does set some eligibility standards for an institution being able to qualify for that, including having $6 billion in taxable valuation. It limits the number of baccalaureate programs that any particular institution can offer to 3. However, those 3 institutions that currently are authored up to 5 are grandfathered in, so they do not have to reduce their potential number of baccalaureate degrees. The legislation requires the coordinating board to use the same standards and criteria in approving baccalaureate degree programs at community colleges as we do at universities. But there are some additional criteria that we have to look at, including whether there's already a successful associate's degree program at the community college. That legislation has been sent to the governor. It has not been signed or vetoed yet.
May I ask a question? On the grandfathering, I know in one section it says the coordinating board shall authorize applied science, applied technology, and nursing to the 3 pilot schools, and may authorize. What is the difference in how the coordinating board will be responding to the difference between shall and may in that bill?
Well, I think that's something we'll probably have to look at in terms of our general counsel and looking at the specifics of the language. I can say, my understanding is that the previous statute for the current pilot programs had already used the shall authorize language in regard to programs, and those programs have always come to us for review and approval. So we don't think that there's going to be a change in terms of that process, since it's the same language that has been previously used with the previous process. Now, they did add nursing specifically as a field for those 3 community colleges that currently offer, but again, it shouldn't change anything because that shall authorize language is already in statute. More questions? I'll move on. There were several bills regarding dual credit that were adopted by the legislature. SB 1091 limits dual credit to core curriculum, career and technical education, and foreign language. It does exempt early college high schools as well as programs that help a student earn an associate's degree in high school. Now, there's going to have to be rulemaking to determine what exactly that means. So the legislation does provide specifically for negotiated rulemaking to define those criteria as to what would qualify under that pathway. SB 802 requires the coordinating board to do a dual credit study. So that, again, that is something that was funded for both the coordinating board and TEA. That legislation was actually signed by the governor, so that is effective law. And then HB 1638 requires us to collaborate with TEA to develop statewide goals for dual credit that address the dual credit's role in enrollment, acceleration, and performance in college-level coursework. And then those goals will, the bill has requirements that those goals have to be reflected in the MOUs between institutions and school districts. And that legislation was signed by the governor. Another piece of legislation was regarding workforce continuing education, HB 2994. It requires that contact hours attributable to certain students in workforce continuing education be included in calculating formula funding. Specifically, we're going forward, it will include continuing education offered to high school students who are beyond their sophomore year, as well as students who are age 16 or older that are in a school not formally organized as a high school or who are incarcerated. It also allows junior colleges to waive tuition and fees for those students.
John, is there any opportunity for recovering those funds that we may have lost, since this seems to be the will and intent of the legislature?
Well, I can tell you that in terms of the effect of the legislation, it is forward-looking. So the requirements of the legislation apply beginning September 1, going forward. In terms of any kind of recovery, that's something that would probably be a board matter.
You know, all the money allocated to the community colleges is all allocated. The $1.82 billion dollars was all allocated based on the contact hours. It's just almost how many contact hours were in the pie. So there's not a pot of money that's sitting in reserve that was not distributed because some of the CE hours were not included or perhaps not reported by institutions. Does that make sense?
Say that again?
Saying is it would be hard to find them if the board were to want to do that, where would the money come from? I think is what he's trying to say.
If your college had 1,000 contact hours of enrollments of these students who would now be eligible that were not reported, it's not like because you didn't report them previously, money was reserved.
We had students for which we had money taken back by the coordinating board. I was just hoping that we might be able to recover that.
Did we recover money from McLennan?
Yeah. No, not that.
No, I don't
Okay.
think we did.
Well, good.
And as I said, the legislation itself is forward-looking. So when we run the formulas for the next legislature, these hours will be included as eligible hours for the formula runs.
I have one question. We had discussed here at this group some concerns about the early college and dual credit. Has anything been changed over what it was before?
I mean, the only thing significant I'd mention would be the legislation previously I mentioned, SB 1091, which again limits dual credit. You know, previously you could only fund dual credit that was core, CTE, foreign language. This says that you can't offer it. So you can't offer dual credit beyond core, CTE, and foreign language unless you are an early college, high school, or again, one of these other programs that help students earn an associate's degree in high school. And defining the parameters of what qualifies under those other programs is something we'll have to do through negotiated rulemaking.
Okay. And early college, high schools are getting more prevalent too than what they had previously, right?
I believe that is the case.
Okay. But that's about the only change.
It's the only change I'm aware of. I don't know if Rex, you.
No, as far as I know, that is the only change that was made to dual credit. And there may be slightly more early college high schools now than there were a couple of years ago. Last year, the number actually went down
Okay.
some. And frankly, I think part of that is in response to opening up dual credit to 9th and 10th graders, where you can, in effect, you can have something that's very similar to an early college high school without having to go through the process of being recognized as such. Although the funding was still limited in what you could get funded for. But I think the number of early college high schools in actually this past spring actually went up a little bit. So we may be about where we were at 2 or 3 years ago in terms of overall numbers.
Remember, early college high schools have resources in place for those younger students that if you are not required, if you offer to 9th and 10th graders outside of it, and that's one thing we have to look at carefully to make sure that those younger students, if offered dual credit, really have the appropriate resources that they may need. And I believe that TEA is looking rigorously at early college high school and making sure they enforce their rules when they approve new early college high schools, which may account for some of the slowdown as well.
Yeah, TEA is in the process of revising their rules for early college high schools. Before, it was sort of a compliance checklist of things that you had to have in place. But as David pointed out, some of that stuff that was in place was very important and integral to the success of them, as a lot of you know, in terms of having the extra advising and the extra tutoring and the kind of instructional support that you needed for the students. And the way they're revising it, as I understand it, is that they'll move away a little bit from compliance and perhaps focus more on sort of qualitative aspects of early college high school.
Yes, sir.
We have some conflicting data that we have to understand better. The numbers of students that are taking dual credit courses and the numbers of students enrolled in early college high schools are going up, while we are getting a lot of data that suggests that college readiness in Texas is going down. We published some data in our almanac, and David, correct me if I'm wrong, and we know that the percentage of students that have demonstrated college readiness has gone down, and we don't know whether that's a function of the amount of testing that's occurring or whether it's simply a reflection of actual declines in college readiness.
We do know that part of that decline is due to the lack of access to tests that were offered in high schools. And so that's a significant part of it. But beyond that, we don't know, but we do know because of the elimination of certain end-of-course exams and some other exams that serve to indicate college readiness in high school, that they don't have that marker. So what we have left are students who are exempt on the ACT, the SAT, and students who take TSIA primarily. There are a couple of high school exams that are still in place, but there's much less access. And we had discussions about this about a year ago, and we had hoped that because so many high schools were offering the PSAT, that could be another marker, but then the College Board changed the PSAT, so there's a different test, a different PSAT every year, and so that made that impossible to do because in the 10th grade it predicts where you'd be college ready. In the 12th grade it doesn't say whether you're college ready or not, and in the 11th grade the same thing. So that went away. I think we have learned from some of the work that Rand has done, and is that more students seem to be getting access to the TSIA in high school than we had thought was possible because of test security issues. But it's something we have to learn a lot more about. So, but there is this issue of we do want students to be college ready when they take dual credit so they can fully benefit. But how do you determine that now, given the lack of these other access points? And so that's a long answer to. We are concerned about that, but we know that part of it is because students don't have this access point.
The numbers that I'm most concerned about are these. It's now the case, I think, that ACT now tests more students nationally on college readiness than the College Board does. And we get briefed every year on how students taking ACT in Texas are doing, and the last year we'll get an update in the next 3 or 4 months. But the last year for which we have data, only 26% of students who took the ACT in Texas were college ready across the board. Now that's a scary number, but here are 2 even scarier numbers. We're trying to expand as a state dual credit programs and offerings, most particularly among low-income students of color. And according to ACT, the percentage of Latino students in Texas who are college-ready across the board is 12%. The percentage of African-American students who take the ACT in Texas and are college-ready across the board is 8%. So clearly, expanding dual credit at the rate that we are, especially in communities of color, that movement doesn't jibe with the test results we're getting on ACT. So you cannot continue to expand dual credit offerings in communities that have such low college readiness rates. So we have to understand that phenomenon better, and we have to look at it. But if those numbers are accurate, if they accurately reflect the state of college readiness in Texas, those are alarmingly low percentages.
Do you have the same data from the TSI?
We have data for TSI, and the college readiness levels for TSI test takers is about 30%, I believe.
There is one thing one has to think about when you look at these numbers is we have done some analysis, and you of course have some SAT takers that don't take the ACT and vice versa, so there's a slightly larger universe of college ready than you can get by looking at either one of those. Then of course, you have community college students aren't required to take either one of those exams, and so they may be they've been tested historically through the high school exams and through the TSIA, and so it's very difficult to merge, but I think that the basic concern remains. We want to make sure that students can fully benefit, and it isn't, you can't infinitely increase the number of dual credit students unless we reach a point where we have many more students who are college ready so they can benefit. And it's a challenge to get to that number, but it's something we have to pay close attention to because the dual credit courses are providing an important function to a lot of students, and we need to make sure that that continues in the way that it's intended by the institutions offering them.
I guess my question, though, is there a difference in the percentage by any great means, depending on what test they're taking? Whether it's ACT,
Yes.
TSI.
TSI?
There is a difference. I think I'm fairly close to the actual numbers. I think our college readiness numbers on the SAT are about 33%. On the TSIA, they're about 30%. And I've already mentioned that on ACT, they're 26%. I would guess that if I were to pick one set of numbers that's likely most accurate, I would pick TSIA because it's aligned with the state college and career readiness standards.
Third.
We can bring to
Less
you,
than a third.
Less than a third.
if you like, at a future meeting. We actually have some analysis that we did about a year ago that looks at this particular issue, and actually we were planning to meet with the commissioner in about a week to go over those numbers again and see what we can do next. And part of the issue is how do we provide a means for students to demonstrate their college readiness with fewer access points now. But we need to get a feel for that. And there's, a student who isn't college ready simply isn't going to benefit enough, and it puts more strain on the instructor. They have students in the class who aren't college ready, and it's challenging enough. So the commissioner has been pushing us hard on this point, and we'll continue to pursue it. And any insights you have would be helpful. But part of it is to try to identify, also to get the real number. We do know how many aren't taking, or taking either uniquely the SAT or the SAT. We haven't done the link with the TSIA, and we can do that, and we should do that. So I'm glad this came up.
Well, I was just kind of curious because I know that the concern, that you shared with us on this, and I was just wondering if that turned into anything with the legislature. Okay. Sorry
yet.
for getting you off track. Okay. Do you want to continue?
No, and actually, while we're on the topic of dual credit, I should also mention that there was a provision in the budget that requires us to look at dual credit offered through the Texas State Technical College system. As you know, the return value model doesn't directly account for those dual credit courses offered by the system. So we have a requirement that we make recommendations on a new formula for the TSTCs that would fund dual credit on a contact hour basis. So, I'm sorry, Commissioner? I'm sorry, semester credit hour basis. I apologize. So that is something that we will be looking at through the Formula Advisory Committee process.
And one of the things, too, that I'm questioning, we're talking dual credit and then early college, high school. In my mind, and I know the difference between them, okay, but they're closely blended together. I mean, are we looking at them as kind of the same, or?
Well, do you want me to?
Yeah, please.
I'll address that a little bit. All early college, high school is dual credit.
Yes.
Not all dual credit is early college, high school.
Yes.
Right? So one is a subset of the other. And part of what you'll hear later on in the agenda is about some of the studies that are being conducted. And so there's at least 3 studies underway right now about dual credit. And I think part of the reason that there was only one piece of legislation that dealt with any major change in dual credit, and then the one piece that dealt with the funding issue is really not really connected to how dual credit is done or anything like that. It's just the funding mechanism for it for the TSTC institutions. But part of it is that in the last session, there was this opening up to 9th and 10th graders of dual credit, and we've seen, as the commissioner pointed out, we've seen a tremendous increase in the numbers of students. And we don't really have any good idea at this point what the effects of that are. So I think part of the emphasis this time was a sort of wait-and-see attitude about dual credit, and let's get some more information. Let's get some real solid data and some evidence behind what we think may or may not be happening with the opening up of dual credit, and then really look at that and maybe go back to the next legislative session with some recommendations. So we'll see some of that, and part of what those studies are going to try to do is separate early college, high school students from, for lack of a better way to term them, regular dual credit students, to see if I suspect that there will be differences in completion rates and attainment and success overall between early college, high school because of the support mechanisms that are there that are not always there for other dual credit students. But we don't know that but we don't have the evidence for that. So part of it is to look at some of that breakdown and also look at different modalities of instruction. And as I said, you'll hear some more about this later on in the agenda. But those issues are going to try to be addressed.
Also, none of us have been doing it in this conversation, but we've been talking internally that we need to actually talk about academic and technical dual credit and put these words, because there is a difference in terms of eligibility. Students don't know it, and we think that the CTE dual credit is going to increase a lot. It's a very small percentage now, and we need to know that there are differences, there should be differences, and let's not mix them in because we won't understand completely. But part of the concern is I think there are, in the high schools, the parents and the students don't necessarily know the difference between the two and even the eligibility. I mean, you don't have to be college ready for the CTE dual credit, and because it's going in a different direction, and that's right, but they need to understand, and that I think is in some cases creating some problems for students who think they've done something different than they've done. While what they've done is good, but it has to just be going the right route. But I think that it's about 10% now, I think, of dual credit CTE. I think it's going to increase a lot, probably, with the endorsements. And so along with separating with early college, high schools, we have to separate this in our analysis as well. And also even legislators don't understand that certain things aren't, when we're talking about being college ready, that's not precluding people from going in to the
Those level one certs.
That's right. And they need to know that, because that's really important, and it should remain that way.
You know, I have a few concerns. In Pasadena School District, we have 6 high schools. One of them has been on a pilot project for early college high school. And this next year, all the rest of them are going to have early college high schools. And your concerns that were shared about a year ago, you know, have given me questions. And I'm just wondering, too, are we starting to track these students that have gone through a dual credit in early college high school where they've got quite a bit of support, and how well are they doing now when they go into a university? And I think that's something hopefully we're looking at, because I would think it might be difficult for some of the students with a lot of support, and then they get into the 4-year university as a junior and that full support's not there. How are they doing? Are we looking at that?
I think, I don't know if we're doing it directly, we should, but one concern I've had has nothing to do with the quality of the courses or instruction, but has to do with someone being 18. And historically, students have frequently had some difficulties when they were their first semester, which has probably nothing directly to do with their preparation, but other changes in their life and freedom and that type of thing. And my concern is if somebody enters essentially their junior year, and if they encounter any of that type of first semester age 18 issue, that it's hard to overcome. You've got less time to overcome that. And I just think assuming that people at that level are going into universities, I think universities have to be mindful of that and just be a little bit more observant of them than they would your typical older junior. And we've had some discussion about that. I don't know the solution, but I just think we have to be aware of it. I think the analysis that the UT system's doing with dual credit, I think, is at least thinking about that, because they're doing some qualitative work. But it's all about the success of students, and some people never have that issue. But historically, those first semester grade points tend to be less on average for everyone. And you know about that personally from your students, of course, not yourselves.
All right. I'll move on to the next slide. Legislature also passed legislation on developmental education, HB 2223. It requires institutions to offer DevEd through co-requisite models. It phases in the requirement such that 18-19, 25% of DevEd must be offered through co-requisite models. The next year, 50%, and then 75% in the year after that. It also reduces the fundable DevEd hours per student from 27 to 18 at career and technical colleges, 18 to 9 at universities. However, it does allow up to 27 semester credit hours at CTCs for DevEd in English as a second language. And that has been sent to the governor. Just some other random bills. HB 493 requires the coordinating board and TWC to report additional data regarding credit hours awarded under College Credit for Heroes. That's been signed by the governor. SB 634 requires that public junior colleges participating in the Skills Development Fund that do not submit the required report must refund unexpended funds and will not have access to that fund until the reporting requirement is met. That was sent to the governor on May 30th. And then finally, 2 bills were passed that address requiring the coordinating board to develop rules so that junior colleges that offer CDL training programs include instruction on the recognition and prevention of human trafficking. So that's what was adopted. In some ways, this legislature was as defined by what it did not adopt on higher ed as what it did. Some of the major higher education issues that were discussed, including re-regulating tuition, eliminating tuition set-asides, reforming the Hazelwood exemption, reforming top 10% admissions, ended up not seeing any legislation enacted. A couple of measures that might be particularly pertinent. You may recall that at the start of session, Senate Finance committee appointed a work group on transfer, and Senator West led that work group. The work of that group led to the introduction of 3 bills, and you can see them there, that would implement various aspects of the work group's recommendation. However, in the final analysis, none of these bills ended up making it across the finish line. And then for TEOG, you may recall that the coordinating board had a recommendation that would have made several changes to the program, limiting award amounts to tuition, fees, and books less Pell, allowing community college students in baccalaureate programs to receive the grant for up to 135 hours. Those bills were not enacted. The challenge that we had on TEOG reform and really any financial aid bill this session was that the Senate was successful on a couple of financial aid bills in adding an amendment that would have stated that the recipient has to be eligible for federal financial aid in order to participate in the program. And of course, one of the major requirements of federal financial aid is you have to be a U.S. citizen or a permanent resident. So the effect of this would have been to preclude undocumented students from participating in those programs. So what you ended up with was, particularly after I think the Sanctuary Cities debate, a real lack of appetite for having that fight. And so the legislature ended up, it didn't pass any bills regarding financial aid. That's my formal presentation, but I'm happy to answer any questions.
Any questions? I would like to ask, how does the agency provide input to the legislation?
In several ways. So the agency tracks and monitors all bills that impact higher education. So this session, we tracked about 500 bills. And we have our staff analyze those bills, and we provide that analysis to the bill sponsors and to the committees so that they're aware of potential issues with that bill. We also meet individually with legislators. The commissioner and our board met several times during the session with legislators to communicate our positions as well as to understand their positions. And I think financial aid is actually a good example of kind of how the process evolves, because SB 886, which was the Senate version of TEOG reform, what ended up actually coming out of committee was very different from what had originally been introduced, and it limited TEOG reform to extending it to community college baccalaureate students. So we try to work with stakeholders and with the legislators kind of through the process to get a bill that implements, our recommendations, but also recognizes kind of stakeholder positions.
Very good. You guys and your staff must be very busy, and glad this session is over.
We're very glad, and next week I will be in North Carolina visiting my parents. So
Very good. Well, thank you and your staff for all your hard work. Okay.
thank y'all.
Marie, I'd just
Yes.
like to add one comment. I know, John, I appreciate your work, and I understand that you don't think the special session really applies to higher ed, but I want to remind you that one of the major policy points on there is tax reform, and that will have a huge impact on the community college sector, which is an important part of higher ed.
That's a very good point. I certainly don't mean to minimize the impact that the special session could have. And of course, though the governor has said that these are the items that he intends to add, up until the very end of that special session, the governor can add any issues he wants to the call. And then, of course, the special session runs for 30 days. The governor can always call additional special sessions if he feels that's necessary.
It looked like a pretty long list to me for 30 days, right?
There's a lot of items that he identified, yes.
I remember sessions when they only had a couple, 3 items, and that list came out. Okay, well, thank you so much, and again, thank you and your staff for all your hard work.
Absolutely. Thank y'all.
Okay. Okay, next, Jacob, our president and CEO of TAC. You're going to come give us an update? Morning.
Morning, Madam Chair. So I'm going to try to do my best to channel Steve.
Steve is on vacation, right?
Eve is on vacation.
Okay.
Aptly deserved. I'm going to keep my comments sort of at the macro, maybe framing level, and then can dive into the questions that the members might have. I will say that if I were to give session a letter grades, that seemed to be a sort of a notable debate in the session, I think we got like a B-. I think we did well. And I think we did well in part because our members, our trustees, our college CEOs, our community college faculty got ready for the 2017 session the day after the 2015 session. We took that challenge seriously as early as June of 2015. We have been preparing for session. We enthusiastically embraced session in January of 2017. And then too much to the credit of all of our members, I would say, we showed up. I have a philosophy that there's a fine line between being persistent and being a pest, and we've kind of walked that line all the way through sine die, but never overstepped. Certainly, didn't want to be uninvited to any one office, but we kind of walked that line. And I think what you saw there is some good positive feedback towards community colleges, as evidenced by some of the statute that was passed, but certainly also in the context of the funding. And let me also say, Madam Chair, I echo your sentiments, specifically with regards to community college funding. We started off on the right foot, in part because this agency, because Commissioner Paredes and his colleagues at this agency sort of raised a very high bar for the legislature and raised a very high bar for even us in terms of our aspirations for what the funding ask would be. And while we came far short of that high bar, Commissioner, and certainly all of us would have wanted the 215 per success point, all of us would have wanted the plus $200 million in total formula funding increase. It was a high bar, and I think it raised the elevation of the discourse about the value proposition for community colleges as we advance in the next decade. And I think that was very important for us. I think that we wouldn't have a healthy coordinating board meeting if we didn't talk about dual credit. Obviously, there's been good discussion to that end. But let me tell you what our approach was for dual credit in 2017, and I think you saw that in the outcomes. We know that we need more data. We know that dual credit is an important component of higher education. We know that dual credit has to be a part of our solution to make sure that we get the 60 by 30 text goals right. But we also know that we have to make sure that we're all confident that dual credit is in the right blend. And so what we did going into session, holding hand in gloves with our own colleges and then also with our colleagues at TASA, our superintendent colleagues, is we went to the legislature and we asked for essentially a 2-year reprieve. What we said to the legislature is give us 2 years so that we can get it right. Give us 2 years so we can allow the RAND Corporation study that is being commissioned by the coordinating board, so we can allow the UT System Office study that is taking place as we speak, so that we can allow our own member colleges to gather the data, to review the data, so that we can make sure that the outcomes present what we want to present, so that we can come to the legislature in as early as 2019 with a set of recommendations, a recommendation or a set of recommendations on dual credit so that we get it right. And I think what you saw at the end of this session is essentially an honoring of that request. The dual credit study that the coordinating board has been charged with is a good study, particularly as it looks at dual credit in the broader context of transferability. The affirmation of dual credit being limited to the core, to CTE, and to foreign languages, with some sort of cleaning up of that language with regards to the early college high school or a early college high school-like programs, I think was an important iteration, but it was by no means a wholesale change to dual credit. I think the legislature heard us loud and clear, and I think now we have about an 18-month, maybe a 16-month window for us to get the data correctly and make sure that we are in agreement in terms of how we are interpreting the data. I just philosophically, on behalf of my colleges, have a very optimistic view of dual credit. My view is that dual credit does work. These are, in fact, college courses for which there is a high school credit assigned. I will repeat for emphasis, these are college courses for which there is a high school credit assigned. If the data shows that there are areas in the dual credit spectrum that are not working, then let us tease that out and let us figure out how we make those improvements. But I'm entering this with eyes wide open. We do want to see the data. We want to make sure that we collect the data and assess it, and frankly, assess it twice again. But I'm coming in with an optimistic view that the outcomes of the studies, plural, will show that by and large, dual credit is working, and specifically parcel out the difference between dual credit general academic courses versus dual credit CTE courses. I think that's an important distinction for us to advance. I think that if you look at community colleges and the policy bills that we advance proactively, put aside some of the defensive play where we spend essentially putting out some mild fires here and there. If you look at the workforce continuing education bill that TAC specifically advanced, this was a top priority for TAC. And then if you look at the other spectrum of it, where we advance a bill that would expand the opportunity for some of our colleges to provide some limited baccalaureate programs in some areas where there's a high demand, as affirmed by the coordinating board. And if you look at all of the totality of that spectrum, it shows, I believe, the wide spectrum of educational opportunity that are provided by Texas 50 community college districts. And that wide spectrum is both a strength of our systems, it is a strength of the state, but it is also a part of the challenge in that we're having conversations with legislators one day about adult continuing education for adults, workforce continuing education for a high school sophomore, a high school rising junior, and the same side we're talking about possibly a baccalaureate in the case of the bachelor's in science and nursing. There is a wide spectrum of issues, it is a wide spectrum of education that we carry forward. It's sort of in that light that we already have begun, special session notwithstanding, that we have already begun the planning back at the office, back with our trustee associations and with TCCTA, our faculty colleagues, to get ready, even at this early juncture for 2019. 2019, we expect we will have a robust, we're going to invite a robust, hearty conversation on dual credit. Dual credit currently is only 10% of all high school students in public high schools. 10%. If we believe that 10% is the saturation point, then we're done. If we aspire that 10% is not the saturation point, then I think we have some work to do with regards to seeing growth, but seeing growth in a way that is good for the students, that is good for our state, and that is good for the communities in which we're serving. And that is going to be a very high bar. We have invited colleagues from K-12. We have invited colleagues from university. We have invited colleagues from this agency. We have invited colleagues from the Workforce Commission and TEA to a conversation with us over the course of the next 6 to 9 months on many issues regarding dual credit. We have to get it right. We have to get it right. And Madam Chair, on behalf of TAC, we are committed to that end, even if it means that we have to work every single day between now and January 2019. Questions?
Questions?
Jacob,
Yes,
would you repeat that stat about dual credit and the 10%?
So simple math.
I haven't heard
Simple
that.
math. Maybe I'm a comp-sci major, took a couple of math courses. 1.5 million students in Texas public high schools, about 150,000 students taking dual credit at any given academic year. Simple math, that's 10%.
Thank you.
It's about 10%.
I don't know why, I just kept thinking it would be a higher percentage, so that really caught my attention. Thank you for sharing that.
Absolutely.
But keep in mind, it's how you do, and I think that point's right, but in the past, most students were older, and if you count the 9th to 12th graders, it's more students. But I think the point is still the same. But I think the historic focal point for most of the students would be a subset of that, so it's probably a
Juniors
higher.
and seniors, by and large, absolutely. With the
The law permits-
exception of the early college high school model, where by
Exactly.
definition you begin with a freshman. I think early college high school students are about a third of the broader dual credit mix. And also included in there are homeschoolers. So some homeschoolers are taking dual credit courses, and they're outside of that 1.5 million count that we talked about.
But given House Bill 505, that, that it's appropriate to count the 9th through 12th graders because they're accessible now, but historically, only the early college, high school students would have been available. So it's one of these things that's a moving target.
Absolutely. And even if you do a 2-point one way or the other, there's a margin of error, 12%. Let's say it's 12%. That's my opinion, and humbly, I'd say that's certainly a saturation point in terms of our aspirations for the percentage of high school students who should be taking some kind of college course, especially when it includes CTE dual credit in that number.
Did you have a comment?
Yeah, no, I understand your reason for calculating that way, but another way to calculate is the percentage of students in Texas high schools have demonstrated college readiness, which I think is key to whether we can be successful in doing credit courses. And if you take a composite of the 3 tests that are broadly used to measure college readiness, the SAT, the ACT, and the PSIA, none of those tests suggest that there's more than a third of Texas high school test takers who are college readiness. So if you take a third of the senior class in Texas high schools, which is about 300,000, and then you add the juniors, you can extrapolate from study about what percentage of those students might be college ready. We are well above the number that we can demonstrate our college readiness in terms of the number of students taking dual credit, because by my calculations, we can say confidently that about 110, 120,000 students in Texas high schools are college ready, and we've got 155,000 students taking dual credit courses. So it's not a percentage of the high school students, it's a percentage of high school students that are college ready that is the important metric.
Certainly, and I, Commissioner, so we've talked about this time and again, and I welcome a very good, hearty conversation about college readiness sort of writ large, right? There's some great developmental education reforms that also passed in the session, so that we have to get that right. And we're expecting a growth rate in terms of K-12 of 84,000 students annually, and they continue to come to college not ready, that we still have that challenge. But specifically to dual credit, a dual credit course is a college course, by definition. An individual college has to make sure that the student taking that course is in fact ready for that course. And so by definition, that student is college ready. I think with regards to the I think appropriate comparison to ACT and SAT, it is a subset of the total numbers of students who are taking that course. I think Dr. Gardner spoke to that earlier. So I think at the end of the day, it's a combination of several measures to figure out for us what is the measure of students that are currently taking dual credit courses versus what is the saturation point that we should expect. I don't think we're anywhere near that saturation point, in my opinion. But again, we'll have that conversation, because we have to make sure that college readiness is an important focal point for all of us, not just in dual credit, but across the spectrum, especially as we look at developmental ed reforms.
And again, I think part of this is what's happening with our students that are taking the dual credit in early college, and that's going to take probably a couple years, 3 years to figure out, but how they are doing when they go into 4-year colleges. The CTE, that's different, but I mean, those that are going, how are they doing? And if there aren't studies headed in that direction, I think we need studies headed that way.
My understanding, Madam Chair, is that the RAND Corporation study, that is one outcomes, is one of the focal points for that study. And certainly, if you were to use the subsequent college course, success in that course is a proxy for rigor. You might argue that point, but if you do, then dual credit students are doing well. They are being successful in that subsequent college course.
Okay, and the RAND is doing a study, or
I
has done a
believe the
study?
RAND study includes outcomes at that point, yes.
Yes, and you'll hear more about that when we get to that part of the agenda. But yes, that is a part of the RAND study. It'll probably be a part of the dual credit task force that will look at some of those same numbers, I would suspect, as well. And it is true that at least what we know so far is that dual credit students seem to do well. What we don't have is information from the opening up of dual credit to 9th and 10th graders. And what we do know is that most of the growth in dual credit in the last couple of years has come in the freshman and sophomore levels. And the lag time for data is we just don't have the data yet, which is part of the reason to argue for let's kind of hold steady where we're at and gather that and take a really good and close look at it. And then, so that's a part of it. We don't have data on those individuals yet, and that'll be coming in over the next year or so, and we can analyze that and start looking at how that fares in the courses.
Okay. Well,
I've asked several times, perhaps you can answer, Jacob. With the advent of adding the 9th and 10th grades, you basically have 4 years for students to be getting new dual credit, which means they could very easily end up with 30 hours. And yet, it appears to me that no one can really answer definitively to me, and maybe you can, maybe I've just been asking the wrong people. Do they then have an associate's degree when they graduate from high school? And is there a prohibition against that? Or is that at the local level that the kind of decision is made?
So I'll stay away from the prohibition piece because this is out of my wheelhouse. But I will say that the last data set that I looked at, the average number of dual credit courses that a student had coming out of high school was closer to 2.5, 2.4 courses. So the vast majority of students in dual credit are not coming out with 30 credit hours, with the exception of those students who are enrolled in the early college high school. So the early college high school, by definition, by structure, begins their students with some level of college courses as early as freshman year in a very structured, methodical way, walks them through 60 credit hours coming out of high school. Those students, by and large, are coming out either with an associate's degree upon high school graduation or immediately thereafter. There are locally, organically developed with school districts and community colleges. There are locally programs of dual credit that mirror the early college high school model. They are not TEA endorsed, TEA recognized early college high schools, but they mirror that in that students are coming out of there with an associate's degree upon high school graduation. But again, I think the data will tell us most students taking dual credit are only taking 2.5 or so courses by graduation. Is that right?
And I said 30,
that's
I
about
meant
right.
60.
Yes, that's correct.
Yeah. And certainly there's no prohibition against that because students do it all. I mean, it's been done for a number of years now. Actually, you come out with an associate's degree. And a lot of students will come out, even out of early college high schools, they'll come out with an associate's degree or they'll come out very close to it. My own personal experience with an early college high school is a lot of students did very well in everything except those courses related to math. And
science.
Yeah, and getting ready for math and science courses was difficult. And so while they might exit the high school with 50 hours or so, they might still be a little short in terms of completely fulfilling their math and or science requirements. So it happens, but certainly there are students who come out with an associate's degree. And there are oftentimes students who will actually be awarded the associate's degree, chronologically at least, before they get their high school diploma.
Right.
2 to 3 weeks is what's happening in our area. They graduate from San Jac with an associate's degree, and 2 to 3 weeks later, they graduate with their high school class.
Let me pivot on that question if I could, just to, I neglected to speak a little bit about the institutional work that we're doing that complements the policy framework. Texas community colleges are very much embracing the guided pathway framework for our coursework, and that includes dual credit. So if I were to be publicly, this is a public meeting, publicly critical of our dual credit offering across the board, not just community colleges, across the board, is that dual credit by and large happens sort of outside of our advising spectrum. Students take this course and they take that course and they take this course. We are methodically working internally with our systems in our guided pathway framework to make sure that the advising occurs at the first college course, and if that first college course is at dual credit, then it begins with the students choose a pathway. Not a major necessarily, but a field of study, and so that students chooses that, and that very much mirrors at least the spirit, if not the letter, of HB 5. And we're doing more of that so that whether they earn 15 credit hours or 30 credit hours or 60 credit hours at some point in their dual credit experience, those hours are actually already aligned to a field of study even before they graduate from high school. We're doing groundwork on that space, and again, complement with the policy framework, but outside of the policy framework.
You know, that advising, I think, is so important, and I think sometimes, too, in our regular community college, we've not paid enough attention to advising and working with people as they go along. And I think we need more emphasis on advising for our regular college students as well as the dual credit and early college.
Yeah. And we're doing more and more of a design in that space.
And we need to, yeah. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jacob. Thank you so much.
Pleasure.
Next, Jan Phelps. She's our director of the Community College Association of Texas Trustees, and just finishing a very, very successful, Roberto Zarate told me it's the most successful weekend conference we've ever had, so congratulations.
Very happy to come before you this morning, Chairman and Council, to report successful outcomes from the recent conference this past weekend. The Trustee Association hosted its annual conference. It was successful for quite a few reasons. We had two people here that were in attendance, and I will ask them to give their comments once I complete an overview. But it was successful because we had almost 100 attendees from 30 of our 50 community colleges. We excelled in raising sponsorships from partners who were extremely important to shoring up our mission, but also ensuring that we provide quality and important professional development that's relevant to trustees at this time. John and Sue Ann Roosh were our conference sponsors this year. We also reached out to quite a few of our partners in the construction field, with our colleges having to reach out and build new STEM facilities and use bonds. We had some public-private partnerships. We also had a presentation on SACS accreditation. So it was a great opportunity for engagement and fellowship. We did have a reception, but the focus of our annual conference is always to provide relevant professional development for our trustees. We did have some presentations on Saturday that focused on the legislative session. The morning began with our partners. I'll reiterate that the important work of the trustees this session has been spearheaded by Roberto Zarate and Carol Scott, who are the co-chairs of our legislative committee, also the chair of the organization, Raymond Lewis. And they have continued to work in partnership with TAC and TCCTA and all of our other partners to ensure that we have a unified voice at the legislature, and you can see the positive results from that unified advocacy. One of the other presentations during the session was the introduction of the Momentum 2021 strategic plan of the organization. Before you, I have brought you all this wonderful strategic plan, and the comments on the survey from the conference note that it's very important that the association have a concise and clear framework for the future. And because of the work that has gone in from the board, that we will continue to see a strong foundation for the future and achieve those goals. So again, we do have a strategic plan, we have a brand, we have lots of great things that the association has done, but we have gotten a lot of great feedback on the conference from the past weekend. So Brigadier General Weaver, would you like to say anything regarding the conference?
Well, thank you, Jan. I thought it was an excellent opportunity. The number of participants has increased over the past years, and there was a lot of interplay between community colleges, trustees, because they met people they hadn't met before, and I think that's a very positive step, especially when you get down to talking about things like dual credit and early college, high schools. I mean, how you do that, and you get involved in conversations, and you've learned some things that you can take back to your own boards. The professional development part of it, to me, is the most intriguing part, because I think that's where we're probably lacking across the board. I know that the COBORD has a requirement that everybody be educated when they get elected. But when questioning colleagues, I find that a lot of people don't know that. And as far as I can tell, there's no tracking system. You don't know whether somebody actually took the requirement or not. It's kind of like a honor system, if you would. It's available online. You've got a very good program online, although I think it's way too long. But at any rate, at the end of that, you take the test and you get certified. But a lot of people didn't know that. So I think we spread the word around. We did some things in the Education Committee we hadn't done before, and I was very, very proud to be associated with that. And I think it worked well. I think that all the associations came together to help produce this, and it was a home run all the way around. So very proud of TAC for being there. I'm very proud of the TCCA being there, and it was just a wonderful experience all the way around.
I appreciate your advertisement for the required training. I want you to know we do track it. We have a spreadsheet upstairs that we do know who in fact has done it online or attended the conference. And so if there's anything additionally we need to do to communicate with the trustees, we'd appreciate that advice.
Trustee Holt?
It was indeed a good conference. I think one of the highlights was producing our strategic plan. We had also had a panel of our various legislative leaders from TAC, from the Trustees Association, and Community College Teachers Association. And I believe that our group was led by former Senator Shapiro, and I think her addition to our team made a huge difference in conjunction with our working with the coordinating board to make our team a lot stronger and a lot more successful.
I concur. It is the result of partnerships that we see such success. So happy to report the conference is over. It will be the first Saturday in June in 2018. Location to be determined.
Very good, Jen. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Okay, next we're going to hear from familiar face, Trey Miller of the American Institute for Research. He's going to give us an update on the Institute of Education Sciences funded research projects supporting TSI reform.
Well, thank you for having me here again, and I'm excited to give you this update on our IES studies on TSI reforms. We were scheduled to do this last CTCLC meeting, but I ended up presenting on the dual credit study instead. And just an update as well, I'm still leading the dual credit study, but I'm now at AIR, so that's update. So just work is funded by Institute of Education Sciences, and we are grateful for the support from Department of Ed. So just what I'd like to do with this briefing is, it's been 9 months now since I've given you an update on what we're doing with the TSI reform studies, these IES studies. So I want to just kind of reorient you all to the work and what we're doing, and then give some very preliminary findings in each of the key focus areas of the studies, so that then hopefully, through the question and answer session, and we can get some feedback on if there's any one of these areas you'd like more detail on in a future briefing. So we actually have 2 IES funded research grants that are both supporting the TSI reforms. So there's a continuous improvement grant, that's a 4-year, $2.5 million grant, and there's a 5-year randomized controlled trial evaluation as well. So I'll talk about each of these studies. It's a collaborative study with AIR, RAND, and the coordinating board and the research team here. So the continuous improvement study, the question here is, can institutions and the state improve policies and practices in 2 policy-relevant areas? So that is holistic advising, or the use of additional information in student placement and advising for developmental ed students. And then the other focus area is support for students testing at the ABE levels on the TSIA. So students, are there ways that we can improve success rates for students who enter college with low basic skills below 9th grade level? There's the RAND AIR study team and also a working group of institutions focused on each of these 2 areas. So for holistic advising, we have San Jacinto College, Tyler Junior College, and Austin Community College. And for the ABE working group, we have El Paso Community College, Houston Community College, and South Texas College. This study has a 4-year timeline. We're currently in the 2nd year, finishing up the 2nd year of improvement cycle with the institutions. We have 1 more year of the improvement work, and then we will be doing dissemination in year 4 of this study. Related study is the study of co-requisites. So the research question here, and is become much more, I think, important and salient given the passage of House Bill 2223 recently. Does the placement of developmental ed students into co-requisite models improve student outcomes? That's the key focus of this study. So we're focusing the study on co-requisites for reading and writing that place students into English 1301 and a support course. Study participants include our research team with the coordinating board and AIR, as well as El Paso Community College, Houston Community College, Lone Star College, Tom Ball, and University Park, and Mountain View College. So we've done 2 semesters of randomization so far, last academic year, and we're beginning the 3rd and final semester for fall 2017 now. Monitoring and analysis will be ongoing, and we'll do dissemination primarily in year 5, but we're wanting to get out early findings, particularly given the recent passage of House Bill 2223. So there's different approaches to these 2 studies. The continuous improvement study uses a collaborative continuous improvement approach. So we work with our working group institutions, each one of them, to develop and implement an approach to their reform area and use data to help refine that over a 3-year period. So it's a collaborative process, choosing what areas to focus on and then improving that approach over time. We then look at the outcomes from this process, the findings from this process across those institutions to try to distill what is perhaps useful for policymaking and guidance to institutions and what emerging practices look promising. So we report findings to institutions, to you, and to the coordinating board and nationally. The co-requisite study is a more traditional research study. It uses a randomized controlled trial research approach. We're randomly assigning students in our study range to either English 1301 plus the support course, the co-requisite model. The control condition is integrated reading and writing, the highest level developmental ed course. The team is monitoring the randomization, assessing implementation, and the impact, and we'll also report findings here. So these studies, though, have similar goals that share, and that's why we report them as together here. So we want to identify promising approaches to improving outcomes for underprepared students, focusing primarily on holistic advising, supports for low-skilled or low basic skill students, ABE students, and co-requisite models. We want to build institutional capacity to support data-driven continuous improvement and promote evidence-based best practices through this work. And we also want to inform policy and/or policy guidance. And we do this at multiple levels with our institution partners in terms of helping them improve their own programs and policies and interventions. With the coordinating board and the state and in terms of reporting findings back and using them to guide decisions here, but then nationally as well. And I think our co-requisite study is going to be really important nationally as that approach is taking traction in other states as well. Okay, so now I'm going to give you just update on some really high-level findings in each of these focus areas. And these are preliminary, but these are things that are starting to emerge across each of these focus areas. So in terms of holistic advising, we've seen that institutions are indeed using factors beyond test scores for placement, using multiple measures, but they face a lot of limitations in doing so. This includes limitations in access to data, so they may not have at all any information on high school GPA or non-cognitive factors that institutions would like to use to inform placement. But even if they do have access to data, it's often difficult to get that information in a form to the advisors that need it for advising. So there's a kind of a IT bottleneck there that we've seen in a lot of cases. Institutions, beyond that, institutions really need more guidance on how to do this. So how do you incorporate these measures? So you just give advisors a bunch of data on students. They don't know what to do with it a lot of times. So they're looking for a more developed approach to work with students on this. Institutions face challenges in providing the kind of comprehensive, streamlined advising that holistic advising really requires. So you have to have one-on-one advising sessions that last longer than other sessions. It requires a lot of times higher skill level than traditional advisors might have had. So there's a lot of challenges there that are resource intensive. So it's challenging to suggest to institutions, well, you need to invest more in advisors when they're resource constrained. So related to that is need for building, advisor and other staff capacity to engage in holistic advising. Another finding is that this is not just about advisors. It's really needs to be a collaborative process. Clearly the IT needs to be involved in terms of providing the data to advisors and interacting and being able to get them what they need. But you also need faculty involved to think about how to best, what factors for what and what areas are most important for placing and advising students, and everyone needs to be on board and have buy-in to the process. So on ABE level 1 through 4 students, so one of the key findings there, institutions really report that students with low basic skills are throughout their institution. So they're not just in developmental ed courses, they're in, workforce courses, level 1 certificates, continuing education programs, that they're all over the institutions. But only students in TSI liable programs will have the test score that identifies them as a level 1 through 4 student. So that's been an issue that we've seen. Another issue that institutions are trying to work with and deal with is that TSI scores may not always necessarily reflect student skill levels due to things like lack of test preparation, language support needs, and other issues. So if it's a language issue, it's a different prescription for how best to serve the ABE students or students testing at ABE level.
Can I ask a question on that? Sure. If you can't really tell where they're at, depending on that test, doesn't that cause a lot of problems?
Well, so Some of the institutions we're working with are developing ways to get further information to try to identify whether it is another issue. So particularly the language issue, for example.
How big a problem is the fact they don't necessarily reflect the skill levels? I mean, percentage-wise.
I can't say that with quantitative data yet, but I think the validity study will tell you a little bit too that about to present on later. So,
Okay.
yeah. So this is more qualitative. This is mostly based on qualitative information so far. That this is what institutions are grappling with, and they recognize as an issue. So,
Okay.
yeah. So a number of institutions did not really understand important aspects of the TSI scores. So one of the key issues was that, students testing at ABE 5 and 6, some students, institutions were thinking that those were ABE level students and were grouping them in with the 3s and 4s, where 5s are developmental ed officially, and 6s are college ready, right? So that's just been a confusing issue for some of the institutions. And related to that, just with a number of different scores, institutions struggle to figure out, which TSI score to look at for placement and how to do that. Students who, this is not unsurprising, but students who test at ABE levels 1 through 4 and enroll in developmental academic programs are less likely to pass developmental ed courses and to persist in college. And then institutions vary in the degree to which they've adopted different approaches that are kind of considered emerging best practices in this kind of area for serving these students. Things like differentiated placement and including placement into non-course based options for ABE students, and degree to which ABE students enter technical programs at various stages of their career or their education. So many of the supports needed for the ABE students are just supports that are needed for students in general. So things like appropriate assessment, high quality advising, clear pathways, and wraparound supports. One other issue that has emerged is that it's, there's a big silo issue here between the workforce programs and the, developmental ed, the academic programs. And institutions are working on breaking those down, and that's been a focus of some of our institutions, and it's, I think, going to pay some dividends. So now on co-requisites, number of findings. This is based on our implementation analysis so far. So we don't have any findings on impact yet, but we've been monitoring implementation both at our study schools and at institutions, 30 institutions statewide, to compare what's going on at our students that are at our institutions that are implementing the randomized control trial versus those that aren't. And what we found is, one, institutions are just implementing a range of different models and approaches for co-requisites. The national conversation, I think, is around a lot around the ALP model. So an extended, study, basically an extension of the English 1301 class with the developmental ed students. But there's a number of different approaches, things like requiring students to take or participate in wraparound support programs, tutoring and things like that can be an NCBO and be part of the co-requisite model. There's the full course approach, so placing students into a full integrated reading and writing course as well as a full English 1301 course. So just a range of different models that we're studying and observing. Administrators, faculty, and students, basically stakeholders in general, cite a number of reasons why co-requisites could be, and they think co-requisites could be effective. I've kind of listed them here. I'm not going to go into a lot of detail here, but quicker accumulation of college credits, help peer effects and things like that as for reasons why they might be effective. Institutions have faced a number of challenges implementing co-requisite acceleration. These include difficulties with advising and scheduling. These are different types of courses than they're used to dealing with. It's placing more students into English 1301, which requires different credentialed faculty to teach those courses. There can be lack of faculty buy-in and interest in or credentialing for teaching of those courses, as kind of related to that. And then just general frustration with evolving policies in this area. There's been a number of facilitators that have been described, so it's really important to have the support of leadership in implementing co-requisite models in your institution. When the leadership at the institution supports it, then it tends to get done. But it's really beyond that, and that may be a facilitator towards involving a wide range of stakeholders in the planning for this. You need to get advisors on board in terms of, how do you place students? You need the developmental ed faculty and the college level faculty on board as well. So it just, a lot of people need to be in on designing these. Those are the main ones. One finding that is, I think, kind of important and emerging here that we're looking at is that there's some evidence that reading remediation, there's a lesser focus on reading remediation and co-requisite models. And that's because English 1301 primarily focuses on writing. And sometimes a support course doesn't focus as much on reading as a reading developmental ed course would. So there's faculties have raised that concern. That's come up in our interviews with students and through course documentation. So it's something we're starting to see. Co-requisite requires flexible and supportive instructors, like different, they have to be college level instructors. They have to teach English 1301, but they have a new type of student. They have students from a wider range of backgrounds and abilities and coming in. And they have to be willing to provide that additional support and be able to do so for those students. Another issue that's coming up is issues around scalability, which is particularly salient around due to House Bill 2223. A lot of the models that are coming out have different implications for scalability. There's been a lot of emphasis around this ALP model, where the support course is basically So students are in English 1301, integrated with college level students in that English 1301 class, and then a certain number of a share of those students, say 10, stay longer and get an extra hour of instruction with the faculty member to address their issues, so it's directly aligned. But in that support course, it's a 10-to-1 student-to-faculty ratio, and that gets difficult. That may work on a small scale, but it gets difficult as you start to try to scale. Cost implications start to arise. So some institutions are experimenting with approaches that may be more scalable. So having all students be developmental ed or developmental in that English 1301 course and getting the 1 hour additional time. So it's the same student-faculty ratio in that course. Another issue, and this is the last one, institutions we're starting to see that institutions may need to think about multiple models to co-requisite, particularly as we begin to scale to other levels of ability and TSI scores. So, some students near college ready may just need a support course, may just need something like an NCBO, whereas further down, students may need a full developmental ed course paired with the 1301. So, institutions will probably not just be implementing one of these approaches, but they'll be designing multiple and trying to, target them to appropriate students. So I think I've gone over, but happy to answer any questions about this. And I'm particularly interested in your feedback about, which, if any, of these areas you'd like more information on in a future briefing.
One of the things that I wonder about, and I'm from an IT world, is that there seems to be a real plethora of business intelligence and data warehousing tools out there available, but very, very few applications, implementations centered around academia and higher education gathering. Are y'all including anything in your work to perhaps work in conjunction with a vendor or several vendors to create the kind of model that's necessary to gather the kind of data that you're going to need to be able to pass on to the decision makers in this process?
Very good question. So some of our partner institutions do have and are, using things like what's the one here in Austin?
Logotech?
Civitas, yeah.
No, what did you say?
Is it Civitas? Is that the Yeah, Civitas. So that some of our partners have these, and we're working with them, as is the vendor, in terms of how do you use this information in various ways. So some of them are better prepared to do innovative things than others.
If I could add, at our last board meeting, we had a major policy issue on predictive analytics. And we really talked about this in a broader sense, and we also brought in a couple of people from St. Jack to talk about what they're doing there. But we've talked to Georgia State, and Georgia State's using a different vendor, and I was thinking about it when Trey was talking about the need for involvement with faculty, and the company's work for predictive analytics that's working with Georgia State actually provides the counselor with information, but it's a means for faculty members to actually add in some critical information to what the advisor has access to and vice versa, so they can, for example, let them know if they've discovered that something's going on in their life that they should be aware of. Of course, there's security issues here, but it's really, you're correct. It's a growing industry. But it's still limited, and one of our strategies within 60 by 30 is to look at predictive analytics and how we can potentially do that in a way to reduce the costs for institutions, because it can be very expensive, and to make some good decisions. So we do know of at least one community college that's doing some things associated with it, but it's still if this is going to happen. It doesn't include some of the holistic part that may be more vital to some of the students. So we haven't connected it to this, but it's something we're looking at. We have a voluntary group that's working with Julie Eklund's division on predictive analytics that they asked to come together. So, and I think our board's very interested in going forward based upon our board meetings. So if you have any ideas on being in the industry, we'd really like to know, because we need to make.
Yeah, the thing that we found at Galveston College is that there were lots of vendors that have tools, but no one has the model, the data model, and the dashboard, and the proper process for accumulating the data to give you the answers you need. I would think some work along those areas that then could be because one thing you don't want to do is bless some vendor, okay? I mean, that's a real slippery slope. But to come out with a model or a process, a data model, this is the recipe, and then share that with all the various vendors and see who might be interested in supporting or doing some work in that area. Obviously, there's hundreds of thousands of institutions that become their market as a result of that. But unless someone picks up that ball and runs with it from that direction, it's not going to happen. We have a vendor we chose because they're in Texas, have the beginnings of that model that we thought we could work with, and we chose them and we went with them. But they were the only one that really had that, that we could find. And so, I don't know, it just seems like the work that you're doing and the direction you're going is incredible. But without the IT tool, and you mentioned that yourself, to be able to really effectively utilize that data, it's not going to be something that will be widely implemented nor used.
Let me add, and it fits into the general discussion, is I thought for a number of years we need to find some way to share information across institutions in terms of what they have learned. Because you'll have, there may be 10 people statewide that need some special type of assistance, or you need to identify how to work with them differently. But if you never see that person, but Brazosport, for example, has had 5 students like that, and they've learned this is sort of the correct direction for them, that here's how to best support them. It would be good to find a way to share that. It's more likely that there are 200 or 300 like that, but they're professionals at each campus who've learned things and have developed information, and it's sort of, there's no way to sort of formally share that information unless they happen to go to a conference together. And I don't know how to do that, but I know it's done to a greater extent in the medical profession. But that's of course not perfect either. But I think we need to realize that we've got experts all over the state working with students, and how can they share some key aspects for what they've learned to work with them. And then on top of the IT, and maybe the IT could help with that, but we need to share that information, because I think we've got some really talented folks out there.
And the IT is a tool, but it's the work on top of that that really makes the difference. To model the identification of all of the data elements that are important and how they fit together, and then create that kind of a structure that can be handed out to any vendor, to any IT tool vendor. And that could then be shared very easily amongst the various institutions, because all you need is a format, really, as long as the data elements are there in the proper organization.
Right. So some of the vendors are working on this, because they recognize the need for it. It's a challenge, and I think they probably could use this kind of support as well, in terms of trying to, work to help them determine how to use the data most effectively to improve placement and other issues at the institutions. And we are producing data through these projects that will be really informative for that. For example, in our co-requisite study, we collected a very comprehensive baseline survey on students who are entering, the randomized controlled trial before they end up in the treatment or control condition. And our plan with that, our goal with that, is to, really learn what factors, what student level factors, what characteristics, what types of students benefit more from co-requisite models than others. And that is useful information for placement, right? So that would inform how, a vendor might incorporate data they would collect for these purposes, and how they would take that next step. So I think connecting the dots here is really important, so.
Talking about stuff that the coordinating board has available, I mean, we've learned so much from all the stuff that's going on and the studies, and data that you have, it seems that maybe you guys have anything like a little newsletter that would go out that would be available to board members and, the administration of the various community colleges, where you could give us little tidbits on it, and yet a link to get into more information, like the different studies and so on, to let people know what is available.
I think we don't in the direct sense you're talking about. We do send out information to the presidents and provosts at all the institutions. How to get that right, I think we still need to work on with scaling that back to 4 times a year, so it's not just showing up as often as it was before. We're trying to focus on what you need to know after board meetings, but we do need to get in there key elements from what we're learning from studies. But it may be we need to develop something that comes maybe about the same amount a year, but really focus on findings from studies to share with people at institutions. And if schools would be interested in that, we'd be glad to do that. It would not be difficult to do.
Well, and
Just don't want to overwhelm folks with
It comes from
emails and.
so many directions.
Yeah.
I mean, you've got AACC sending out publications on findings, you've got Aspen, you've got ATD. I will say the coordinating board's website is an absolutely wonderful resource, and I think colleges, especially the practitioners, utilize that fairly regularly.
When you mean practitioners, the IR practitioner?
No, I mean the, probably your chief academic officer, your chief student services officers.
But I think it would be good to, maybe you've got it, but I would like to see you include email addresses of board members. With email, if you don't want to read it, you don't have to. But if you've got it and then got additional links, I would love something like that, to be able to look up this stuff and see what's available. And I think it should be also available to board members, because, they can learn an awful lot from this.
We can talk more about how to do it again. As was said, we're conscious of the volume of emails that goes to everyone, and we get the same things. Raymond and I probably have 200 emails a day, and we want to sort through those. But so if we send you something, we want it to be important. And maybe we need to target some
Topics or something.
a few topics, and let's talk about how to do that.
Yeah,
We'll figure that out.
we'll talk about that. It's important that we tell you, at every board meeting, we have two issues that we discuss. We have a major policy discussion, and we have a recognition of excellence. And both of them deal directly with the kinds of issues you just mentioned. We talked about predictive analytics a lot at board meetings in the past couple of years, and we had a major policy discussion about predictive analytics. I think, was it 2 board meetings ago? Was it the last board meeting? Anyway, we've done that. We've featured community colleges and universities that are doing extraordinary work in student retention and persistence. We know that colleges and universities get tons of information by email about products that are available. So we don't want to inundate people any more than they already are. We'll have to figure out a way to do this if we can. But I think that's one of the reasons we urge all higher education leaders to tune into our board meetings. We publish the agenda. You don't have to sit through the whole thing, but I think it would be a good idea that people paid attention to the recognitions of excellence and the major policy discussions.
I have asked Julie Eklund and her staff to increase what we call 2-pagers, which is a very brief summary of items. And what we may need to do is have a clear-cut link for where those are going to be available, so everybody can go in, or if you want to subscribe to get those, you can, to make it that you have to prescribe. But those are designed to be very focused and get the point. We have a nice one in terms of, that we just did, in terms of students going out of state and having more information on where they're going, what kinds of institutions We've had one for years on our 8th grade cohort and various topics, but staff are being asked to, we almost have a quota for those now, a couple of those per year with relevant things to really focus them in a way you can sit down and read them in 3 or 4 minutes. And then if you have other questions, well, there'll be a person you can contact. So that may be one way to get at what you're talking about.
I would make sure you include the trustees, because it's probably addressed more to, administrator, staff, et cetera.
These 2-pagers are actually designed to address really anyone who has an interest in a topic. So, for example, if you wanted to know what's happening with males in terms of flow through college, that was one of the historic ones we did with the 8th grade cohort. So one could go in and do that. So they're really designed for anyone and they're designed not to be, the audience is not researchers. They can help researchers, but it's designed where really anybody should be able to pick it up and understand the point.
Can I help you here, David? You know what this steps on? If you don't mind, I'll give you a CEO's perspective. There is a constant dance, as you know, between the governance role that the board should do and the day-to-day management role that management should do. And the level of detail contained in a bunch of the work done by these groups is clearly managerial in intent. It's not really meant to be at the big strategic level of board governance. And so I might be the only CEO with the guts to actually say at this panel, this is a sort of, if you wanted this information, I think a dialogue between the board and a CEO is the place that you decide who gets what, that by putting the co-board in the position of deciding what is governance and what is management and who's going to be on which of our mailing lists is putting them in an untenable position. And right in the middle of an ongoing dialogue that I know goes on between boards and managers. And so I think David has done an amazing job of saying it's there if you want it. But the truth is, this is really, I think, a local thing between a board and a CEO.
And I don't disagree with that, but I don't know that, like in the case of our board, that we're even aware it's available. I think we should at least be aware it's available.
So you have one of the best CEOs in the state.
Absolutely.
You could have that conversation with her and work out a process. But I think asking the co-board to broaden it into, a lot of their work is meant for practitioners and not for the governance folks. Unless you're talking about the event that we have every year in November, and then other things that are intended for trustees. But generally, this is one this matter right here stomps right in the middle ground between those, and so there'll be some boards that have a strong appetite for that, or even individual trustees, and then there's going to be many who don't.
And those that don't just don't need to read it.
Well, so here's what the co-board will get. The co-board will get a bunch of either emails or phone calls saying, stop cluttering up my email with all of this crud. I'm not interested in this. They can't win for losing on a deal like this.
That's why you put unsubscribe buttons on it, and you just,
I can say since our website.
So then the issue becomes, do you opt in or opt out?
Yeah, I will suggest.
And what you're asking for is, give it to me unless I opt out, and that's just as troublesome as the other option.
But there's so much good knowledge
Agreed.
that board members aren't even aware of exists.
Agreed.
And everybody doesn't have Brenda Hillier as a chancellor.
So whose responsibility is it to get that information?
I think we should at least let the board members know it's available.
I think
You have a wonderful conference once a year where those sorts of resources could be talked about.
60by30text.com or .org as was suggested, is the place to go. It's very high level, it tells you everything about the plan, and it can go into data by school, and it can drill down further and get to more and more specific information.
That's a good point.
That's the one web
Very
address
good
you
reason.
have to remember, and I think it's better than that accessibility is better than it's ever been, and we had a lot of input from schools in developing that. So start there, and because that's intended broadly, and you can drill and get more and more data.
That's a good point, and our organization should maybe be the ones to share the word, and then if people want to opt in. Good point.
The other thing is the 2017 Texas Higher Education Almanac is on our website. You can download the whole almanac. It's in a very readable format, and I think that's a starting point for every trustee or board member that they look at the data for the state, and then they look at the data for your particular institution. You can find out just about everything you need to know about it.
You can get to that through the same web address, 60by30text.com or .org. And it's there as well.
Madam
You
Clerk.
only have to remember one address.
May I ask a different question, or are y'all still?
No, go for it.
No.
No, I gave in, okay? I think he's right. We do that through our organization.
Before, I did want to say, I mean, it's a very fascinating conversation for me. But, you know, we are getting into the phase with these particular studies where we're wanting to start disseminating findings to different, audiences at different levels. So, including if you think it would have an impact amongst, trustees and such, we'd like to do that. And so if you have, suggestions for us how to do that for RAND AIR, that's really our goal, is to have, a positive impact on students and on public policy through our research and analysis, both RAND and AIR. So, and we have a number of studies we've done, so we need to better disseminate them if they're not, getting out there to everyone. So you've seen dual credit, you've seen, the community college baccalaureate study, all those. So.
Well, Trey, maybe we need you working better with Jen to get it out to the people. Maybe that's the answer. Yeah.
Yeah.
Very good.
Thanks.
You had a question?
Yes, Trey, my question is this. I know for the co-requisite model, you're looking at English 1301. And then we have the legislation that passed on the co-requisite model, which I assume also includes math. So as a researcher, are you thinking that what you learn with 1301 has application for math? Or are you thinking that needs to be researched separately?
I do think there are some findings that I think will be relevant across math and English, reading, writing, but I do think it would be, useful to look at math in a similar way. We chose to focus on English primarily because there were ongoing studies with new mathways and a lot of stuff going on with acceleration in math already, and so the space was challenging to kind of get into. So we chose to focus it, and IES, Department of Ed really wanted us to focus on a particular type of intervention so that we could, we wouldn't get too, distracted across, trying to look at different models. So they really made us refine the approach that we were looking at as much as possible. So to answer your question, we will look and try to think about what would be relevant for math as well, but not everything will be, and I think it would be valuable to look more closely.
Okay. Well, I think moving right along, thank you so much, Trey.
Thank you.
And we're going to move to our next item then, which is update concerning transfer issues from Rex.
So when Gary and I put this item on the agenda, we did it in hopes that the transfer legislation that John Wyatt talked about earlier would have passed. But instead, it did not. It went through the Senate, but it did not get out of the House. But nevertheless, I think it's important to point out that transfer became, at least for the Senate side of the legislature, transfer did become a very important issue, and we all know in this room that transfer is a very important issue. We've looked at some numbers, and what we know is that about 75% of all graduates with a bachelor's degree have some community college hours, and about 30 or 35% of those students have 30 or more hours. And given the rising cost of college and the affordability issues that students confront, our own emphasis on trying to maintain student debt at its current levels, which is lower than most other states in the country, then using the community college as a way to get that first 2 years of college becomes even more important, I think. And so transfer is a big issue. We know that, for example, that when you look at students who, and you just look at those courses that they got A's, B's, or C's in, then we know that 2-year to 4-year students lose about 15 hours on average when they transfer. Some of that may be because they change majors, perhaps, but certainly a lot of it is because the courses they took at the community college don't readily transfer to the major that they've chosen at the 4-year institution. One of the more interesting findings in this is that if you look at a transfer from a 4-year to a 4-year, then the loss in hours is about 16. So that tells us that transfer is not just a 2 to a 4-year institution problem, it is also a 4-year to a 4-year institution problem.
That is interesting.
Which I was really fascinated by that. I never would have expected it. We know that students with dual credit hours, that number goes up from 15 to about 21, or roughly, I think, isn't that right, Julie, about 21 hours or so. Yeah, so there's still a lot of issues that need to be looked at with transfer, and while the legislation that was introduced would have certainly helped us in that endeavor, there's still a lot of things that we can do with transfer that we have been doing and that we will continue to do. We're going to continue to look at the core curriculum and ways to try to make it more transfer friendly. What we know is a lot of students take courses that make them core complete, but when they go to their major, they may not apply to their major. So we're trying to do some efforts to make that transition much more seamless for students. And probably the primary focus, and John talked about this, in that we got some money in an FTE to continue our work with fields of study. And we've identified the top 25 majors, and so those are the ones we're going to focus on. We have 4 fields of study that will be going to the June cause meeting and the July board meeting for approval in architecture, engineering, music, and nursing. And we have, I think, 6 more sets of rules that will be going to the cause and July board meeting in areas like communications and business and criminal justice and so forth that are also in that top 25, or 5 of them are in the top 25. One of them is dance. And while dance is not in the top 25, we've heard from a lot of institutions that a field of study in dance would be helpful because the problem is that Dance 1 at this institution is often Dance 3 at another institution, and what's Dance 4 here is Dance 2 somewhere else. And so we've heard from a lot of people in the field that dance is just problematic, for a lot of students in terms of transfer. So we're pursuing that work as well, and our goal is still to have all those top 25 at least finished by the end of this biennium. And we've learned a lot over the past year in terms of how to do these things and how to run the committees and how to get it operating. We've been a little bit slowed down by the hiring freeze that was imposed on state agencies, because one of the positions we had was going to be dedicated to doing this kind of work. But that'll lift in September 1, and so we'll be, hopefully, yeah, it ain't over till it's over, yes. Thank you for reminding me, Mike, that that's true. But we hope that it will be over by then, and we'll be in a position to actually have someone go to work on September the 1. So we'll continue that work and keep working on the transfer issue and keep plugging away at it and trying to make it as seamless as we possibly can. We will need your help in two areas with this. One is that every one of these fields of study that we do, they're done by faculty and administrators over those areas. Half of the committee is from 2-year institutions, half of the committee is from 4 institutions, maximum of 24. And we bring them in and set them down and ask them to identify the courses that should be the lower division courses for that particular major, and to identify what those should be for every student in the state of Texas that majors in that area. And so, we have to ask institutions to send their faculty and their administrators to us, and that's a cost that you guys bear. And if we crank these up, we'll be coming to you, we'll be going to the well more and more often to get faculty to do this, and so we need y'all's support to send us the faculty that we need to accomplish this. And then the other piece of this is that once adopted, we need the institutions to fully adopt them, and where they have the faculty and the critical mass that they need to fully offer a field of study, or at least offer some of the courses in that field of study, then we need the institutions to adopt those and do that. And over the past several years, the use of field of study by institutions has sort of fallen off to a great extent, partly because some of them are just old and out of date at this point, the 10 that we do have on the books. And so those are in the process of being revised. But as we go forward, we need y'all to use them, because if you adopt them and the students take those courses and they go to a 4-year institution, they must be accepted toward that major.
Well, let me add
if the student doesn't, if you don't offer them, then the student can't take those courses, then they have nothing to take to the 4-year institution that must be transferred and applied.
Even with the existing, the previous field of study that some would say were out of date, they had the force of law behind them, and if they were followed, we could enforce them.
Yep. They are still in effect, yes, absolutely.
Also bear in mind, when fields of study are developed and either the community colleges or universities are submitting a program in that area, if you don't have it already, our staff is going to look to be sure that they follow the field of study.
We're talking about for new program approval.
Yeah, for new program approval, that's the only way it can work. Secondly, Rex has believed in the past that more students were completing the field of study at community colleges than were being reported to us. It's important that when they complete, that be noted in their record, because we need a way to follow up to make sure they're working. And if we can look at a student with a field of study, we know what courses they took, we know what happened, we can look to see what's happening at a university, at least on a sampling basis, and we can begin to examine when it's not being followed. So it's, I think 10 years ago when some of these were developed, part of the problem on the part of the coordinating board, they developed them and then went on to other things. We're going to be much more actively engaged in monitoring them under Rex's leadership than we have been in the past, and we think that will help. But we need your help to follow up and to make sure they're done, and we're committed to making this happen. But even just that flag, indicating that flag on field of study completers, gives us the ability to do some analysis that we have not had before. I can tell you personally, I've only had one person ever call and say, they're not taking my hours. I don't believe that it's the only, but somehow we have to know. And that will at least give us a means to at least do some follow-up to identify if it's not happening. But also, when you guys believe it's not happening, we'll call. When I got that call, I called the university and had them look. And in fact, in that case, they did take every course that the student had taken in the field of study. Some of you have heard me say this, but they received an associate degree in engineering from a community college, and they hadn't taken one math course that was in the field of study or that would be accepted by any engineering school in the country. That school has changed that, by the way, about 8 years ago. But before then, so we want to be your partners in making this happen, and we will support you however we can, and Rex is exactly the right person to be leading this.
Okey doke. Any questions for Rex? Okay, we'll move on. Next, we're going to have the discussion of the TSIA validity study, and Gerald Booker and Suzanne Morales-Vale will be presenting. Welcome.
I was going to say good morning, good afternoon. Madam Chair, members of council, I'm Jarrell Booker. I just wanted to give you a brief update on our validity study on the TSIA. The A is the assessment part of TSI. We have a contract with College Board to create the TSI, and then we set standards for scoring on the TSI. And then at some point, we have to reach back in and check to see if the standards we set are actually valid. So what we've done is we recently had a validity study to make sure the scores we had laid out actually accurately show whether students are going to be successful in their first level college course. And if you see that last bullet, it talks about a 70% likelihood of getting an A, B, or C. That's kind of our marker. So we looked at 2013 data through the College Board, and then ourselves through Julie Shop. We looked at 2015 data, and we were able to find out whether the scores that we had set for math, for English, and writing were accurate. And what we found is the scores for math and reading, right on point. They were generally in the ballpark. We thought those were very good, around that 70% marker. The writing, it appears that it was a little high. The 350, we had 75% likelihood that they were graduating. So they used and I'm not a psychometrician, so some logistic regression. I know Trey is back there, he'll nod his head, but a logistic regression model to figure out what would be the correct score. And we've come up with what we think would be a better score of getting that 70% likelihood of A, B, or C. And we went back into the rules to make that sort of change. We left math and English where it is, and we moved writing from a 350 to a 340, and then the actual right placer with actually writing an essay, we moved it from a 5 to a 4. And we think that's more accurate of who can actually come into your institutions and pass that first level college course. We also, in the rules, had to go back and explain what would happen if a student shows up and already had the 340 before, so they wouldn't have been college ready, but now they are under the rules, and what the institutions can do to actually address those students who are showing up on your campus. Right now, we're ready to start with the fall, for the entering class of fall 2017, for these sort of scores, and we're hoping after it goes through the board meeting, we'll have a number of opportunities to have webinars and discussions with your institutions and your staff about actually how to implement this moving forward. Without going too far ahead, you've heard about House Bill 2223 today. You've talked about it a couple of times. We just wanted to reassure everyone that we'll be having a webinar. If the governor signs this into law, we'll be having a webinar to discuss implementation about House Bill 2223, where we can be helpful. We'll have the writer will have money also to be able to help institutions possibly implement this, and we want to be helpful in the process over the next 2 or 3 years in getting this right. So
I just want to point out that I think Jarrell clarified it at the end, but this is a proposed rule that he was just talking about, and so the time for comments is still open. What is it, at least 2 more weeks?
26, yeah, 2 more
And
weeks.
I think as of yesterday, we had 3 comments, so if you have any comments, please take advantage of that opportunity.
Absolutely.
To comment.
Okay.
That was it. It was very brief, but I didn't want to lose the opportunity to share with you.
Oh, any questions? Okay, very good.
All right, thank you.
We appreciate you.
Thank you.
Thank you for coming. Okay, next. Rex, we're going to turn it over to you too, and again, and for a discussion on the composition of our board. And we're bringing Gary in, right? Oh, he didn't?
And Marie, actually, I put most of this in your script.
Okay. Well,
And do you want to do it or you mean to do it?
go ahead. Yeah, I'll let
Well,
you start, and
okay,
I'll finish
okay.
up.
Now, you're assuming I'm going to remember all the names in the correct order and everything.
That's
But
right, I'll
anyway,
help you.
as you said at the beginning of this, Marie, this council is, this is it's basically its 4th anniversary. In the beginning, we drew terms for 1, 2, or 3 years, but then there was conversation, and all the terms were changed to either 4 or 5 years. And so obviously, with it being the 4th anniversary, there are some terms that are expiring. And then, kind of as David just pointed out, there are proposed appointments of new members that will take the position of the people that are that are leaving the council, and then some the current members will be staying on the council, subject to board approval, be reappointed for another term. And Marie, you have the list in your
Yes.
script if you want to do that.
This is the last council meeting for Greg, Mark, and Mimi. And I'm so sorry. We're going to miss you. I'm going to miss you. I was mentioning something to the commissioner before the meeting. I think we've really accomplished a number of good things with this, and I think our community colleges are probably all better off for this, and not saying that the job is done. We've got plenty yet to do ahead of time, but and I think the commissioner made comments in thinking that this has been advantageous to the coordinating board too. So, as the first group on this thing, and you've both been very, very supportive and a lot of input in helping develop where we're going and what we've done. And I want to thank you, and I'm sure the commissioner and David probably feel the same way, right?
Yes. We know how busy you are with your jobs and your board work, and we know that.
Marie, I just want to say that you have been an excellent chairman for us.
Yes.
Well, I've enjoyed it, and let me tell you, it's not on this list, and I just let them know today. I will be here next meeting, but I'm going to be resigning, partly because, and that's why I haven't done it yet. Brenda is going to help me, and we're going to see about having, hopefully, one of our Sanjac members, Dan Mims, come on to this board and take my place, which is me leaving a little early. But I've taken over as chair of Sanjac, and, I don't want to be too piggish. I'd love doing them both, but I think it'd be good, for if Dan could get on this board, and he'll carry through with a lot of good things. But I've loved doing it, and I think this board has been fantastic. And it's really been, if you look back, in the very beginning, we were kind of going down a direction, and I have to thank previous members of the coordinating board, because it was going down a direction that we did a little change on. We did kind of a right angle change on, and they were willing to work with us. And I thank them, for the coordinating board, for being willing to do that. And I think it's been great, and I just, I know those that are left here will continue to do a great job for us and keep things going, and a lot of good work has been done. I do hope that we take advantage a lot of the studies and so on that are being done. And I think that can help the presidents with their running their colleges, and the board members with helping serve on the boards for policy. So, thanks to all of us for the work that's been done. Mike is going to stay for a second term, right? Anita, you're staying for a second term. Kay Paul and Rex. And the new ones coming on are Lonnie Howard, from the president of Lamar Institute of Technology, Ricardo Solis, president, Laredo Community College, Brenda Kay, president of Kilgore College, Cheryl Sparks, president of Howard College, and Ron Walker, board of trustee for Victoria, and Mark Williams, trustee, board member for Austin Community College. So that's going to be the new board.
Does that maintain our balance of presidents and trustees?
George, we're Also at the.
explain that.
Yeah.
Yes.
And we discussed this briefly at the last meeting. We have put the rules out that govern this council, and we made slight modifications to them to where there's now actually going to be, and I forget, I'm sorry, without having it in front of me, I think there's one more trustee, but effectively, when you look at the CEO leadership from TSTC and Lamar, the number of, to use Mike's terms earlier, governance and management, then we're still balanced. And what we're doing is we're off by one. I think it's on the trustee side, but we're expanding the council to 15 total, and that helps us from getting a quorum. As you know, we sometimes struggle having a quorum, and so by adding 3 members to our current status of 12, we only have to pick up one more person for a quorum. And if you remember the last meeting, we did that in about 45 seconds because we were out of time. And so all of that's going to the June, July calls committee, and then the board, subject to their approval. And then the next meeting in September with the new members. And that's the direction we're heading.
And the reason for that was to make it easier for a quorum. Gary figured out if we could add that number, we would only need one more to make a quorum, and our percentages would be better than to make sure we had a
You're going to
quorum.
have a larger number of presidents and management people than.
No, you have.
Or it's the other way around.
You.
Is it going to be 8 and 7?
You have 7 trustees from community college, 6 presidents from community college, and then leadership from TSTC and the Lamar Institute.
Because they don't have boards?
Well, their boards are state-appointed boards,
I
just
got
like
you.
our boards. And so going to their management is probably the more appropriate level.
Well, and I may be wrong, and I don't have a list in front of me of the attendance, but it seemed to me like the trustees were more
Faithful.
dependable than the presidents. Obviously, the presidents got lots on their plates. And so you're increasing the number of presidents, which may affect your ability to get a quorum.
No, the president's, the extra, the odd person, if you will, we're currently 12, and we added 3. The extra person went to the trustee. And so, yes, and your point is when we looked at that and we had conversations both internally and with Marie, that was looked at, and that's definitely a factor of why we went that way.
Okay. I still think that moving with more presidents or quote-unquote management people versus presidents, but versus trustees, that you're going to have the same situation. We've had one president who's never been here in the last year. We have one that's missed, I know, the last 4 or 5 meetings. And I know our trustees have been dependable. So, that's just my personal feeling and comment.
We added one trustee.
Yeah, but you added 2 or
No.
3 more presidents.
No.
We have one more trustee than we did.
You'll have 7 trustees from community college, 6 presidents from community colleges. You'll have Mike Reeser representing TSTC, and then we have a representative as a president from the Lamar, and we've had a person on the council that or was named originally that attended a few meetings and then has not attended from the Texas state system. And so
I
that
voiced
is
my opinion.
well, but
No need to
And
belabor
it was voted on at the last meeting.
I was here.
it was discussed. It was laid out, but then the rules were modified and put out for comment and that kind of stuff. But George, your comment, I think we considered that the trustees do attend the meetings, presidents, their schedules, conflicts, and that stuff, all that was considered. And that's why the odd person, as I kind of said, went to the trustees.
Okay. All right, thank you.
All right? Any more discussion on that? I think then that pretty much takes care of our meeting. And my gosh, look at the time. I didn't think we were going to make it today. Our next meeting is scheduled for September 14th, 10:30 a.m. We've had to make some changes because it's difficult with Southwest Airlines recently. And if there are any more questions or concerns or comments, then the meeting's adjourned. Thank you so much.
September 14th.
The 14th.
Well, I'll see you
When you see me.
around the state, I'm sure. I just got reelected, so I'm gonna be around for another 5.5 years.